and made our way down the coast, including here at the Horizon House, and then ended up at the John Lautner building in Capistrano Beach, after seeing a whole bunch of important houses that many people don't even realize could have ever existed here. And I think for people to understand this particular neighborhood is fascinating, because there are scores of mid-century modern style buildings here that I think everybody isn't clear about the wonderful kind of islands that exist in this whole community. I know there's a very much kind of, this like 80s, 90s tract mentality, but unfortunately that exists in many, many neighborhoods throughout the country. It's not just something focused here. But to have this kind of building, I think, is amazing. Now, as you might know, this building was part of the Horizon Homes program, which was from 1961 to 1964. It was primarily run by the Portland Cement Association, which is still in business, which is a very big commercial group, and a whole bunch of other concrete industries around the country. There were 11 Horizon Homes done in Southern California. None are like this, and none are the same. There's another couple here tonight who, here you go, who have the Horizon House in Riverside, which is great, which is fantastic. A completely different style. A box that's square that is floating, because even the fireplace you mentioned to me floats. Everything's kind of floating off the ground with this idea that, very similar to this, how concrete can be perceived as something that is light. And that's what this Horizon Home program is doing. So the 11 houses that were done in Southern California, there were over 300,000 visitors to the houses during that time. And the 150 houses that were built across the country, there were millions and millions of visitors to them. And so this program, which is kind of similar to the case study program in many ways, but was looking at how buildings could be done in a way that could be somewhat affordable and fireproof and earthquake-proof and very easy to maintain. That was really the idea. So when this came to be in 1964, when you look at an old aerial photograph of this entire valley, there was not another house here then. This was it. And so when you see an old aerial photo of this, it looks like a flying saucer landed in this giant valley, which was then, run by the Daguerre family, who were teamed up with the Moultons, who were sheep herders, who were Basque, who had this entire ranch. So the city boundaries of Laguna Niguel now are very similar to what the original Rancho Niguel was, which went to the mountaintops all the way around this, from the beach all the way to the freeway. It wasn't a freeway at the time, but that was the same ranch. And so the idea was to promote this kind of, and this was the word they used, utopian community, when the community was being developed first starting in 1957, and then 1959 was when stuff kind of kicked in. There were over, if you didn't know this, the Laguna Niguel Corporation had over 6,000 investors on the Pacific Stock Exchange who invested in this community, almost $8 million at that time, to market this, to help support the development of this entire community. And one of the people that they brought in that was fairly critical at that time to do the master plan was Victor Gruen, who, if you might recognize that name, was one of the major planners of communities and shopping malls. It was a big deal for him. He was one of the original people who did the first enclosed shopping mall. And one of the things that really upset him toward the end of his life, right around the late 1970s, was he felt that people had co-opted this idea of what the shopping mall could be, where he felt it needed to be a community-engaged environment that did involve shopping, but also involved education facilities and recreation facilities and other types of activities. It wasn't just a big shopping mall surrounded by a parking lot. And he did the master plan for this whole community, and that's why this kind of structure then was tied into it. So part of Gruen's original plan involved a civic and cultural center at the 25 acres, which is still empty, around the existing new city hall in Laguna Niguel, right there at Crown Valley and Alicia Parkway. That was Gruen's focus, was for a civic cultural center there. So it's fascinating to see how this community was planned on being developed, and to have this building be the first house that was built here is absolutely incredible. So when they first commissioned it, and Hans will know the technical aspect of all of this, because this whole thing is fascinating, that it's all held up like a tree trunk by that center core, and then this roof is completely cantilevered. So even the heating and air conditioning blows up through that interior plenum when this was sprayed over a, inflatable bubble to kind of build this thing. So it's an amazing way of looking at how architecture was being promoted at that time, using concrete in a way that was fireproof, that was earthquake-proof, that wasn't, particularly earthquake-proof. This building is amazing that it hasn't been cracked all these years, and that it's not susceptible to rot and termites and all the other kinds of things that, were a problem, particularly with mid-century modern houses. Because when you're building with something, even the adjacent houses around here that use a lot of wooden 4x4s and wood trim and all that other stuff, as you know, if you live in any of those, you're having to deal with that maintenance issue constantly. So for a house like this to occur in Southern California, there is not another house that meets this same type of engineering technical qualifications anywhere in Southern California. And so it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to experience, particularly in a community like this, and gives us some insight into how this community was originally developed and what the intentions were by people like Cabot, and Forbes, who were the original owners of the entire property when it was being developed as a community, and by Victor Gruen. So with that said, I think Hans can tell us a lot about how this structure was actually put together, which is amazing.
First place, I want to apologize. I hope I haven't brought you out falsely, in that I'm 83 years old and my hearing is going away, but I think my memory is going faster than my hearing. So I was hoping that I could go down into my garage and get into the files and somehow begin to remember the project. And it turned out that I had a flood some time ago, went right through my garage, and it must have been one of the files that I had to throw out. So basically, it is a very fascinating piece of architecture, and George Bissell was a wonderful, wonderful creative architect. Amazing guy to work with. And again, I wish I had the files, because the team that was formed to build the thing was a wonderful team to work with. The precast concrete people, and they also did what's called post-tensioning, were wonderful to work with. And so basically, and by the way, at the time it was called gunite, it's now called shotcrete, and we found somebody who could do the air inflated form. So basically what this is a very, very straightforward structure. And the reason it's so straightforward is that it is based on trying to repeat pieces that could be made over and over again, and identical pieces, and yet with some kind of creative feel to them. So this is composed of a 60-foot diameter ring, and it has 20-degree wedges around it. And these are called precast concrete. And what it is, they're actually cast in a precast yard, and they have holes that have been put in them. And then they were brought out on temporary shoring, and they were set around the whole ring. And then on the interior, there was a very strong steel ring, a bottom one and a top one. And then what we did, we threaded these high-strength post-tensioning devices, rebar, called PT, post-tensioning, strand, and they went through holes in the precast concrete that had been put in there during the casting, and went out to the rings, the steel rings over the fireplace. The ones, there was a lower one, and we had a layer of post-tensioning at the bottom, and we had an upper one with post-tensioning at the top. And then we inserted a donut airform, and this was a little bit different from anything that was done much at that time. So we inflated this form, and then we started doing what was called guniding at the time, but is now called shotcrete. And we spray concrete on the underside, we spray concrete on the upper side, and we build up the thickness to, if you can believe it, 2.5 inches. And then as we release the air, the tensioning on the steel would then bring the whole thing together very strongly. In the center, we had a cage of reinforcement that was shaped as a here, and then we put the shotcrete over the reinforcement cage all around the outside. So in essence, it's a very, very strong, with a large diameter column that's in the center of this structure. And I wish I had the file to give the proper credit to everybody that was on the team. I want to give a special credit to George Bissell. He amazing guy, amazing, great guy.
Tom, should we open it up to questions? And
yes, if anyone has questions.
Okay. Again, my hearing, so shout.
How long did it take you to build it?
I can't remember. That's going to be my answer. No, I think it was, maybe, it wasn't a great deal of time. Because what they call parallel construction nowadays, while the foundations were being putting in, the precast units were being made. But as I recall, the one that took the longest was the donut airform.
Wow.
That held us up a little bit.
The permitting process now is so cumbersome. Nice word.
That's very polite of you to say.
What was it like to do something like this with the people that handled permits back then?
Again, my memory is it's very faulty. But at the time, we had tremendous help, and they were it. The cement industry, concrete industry. This was really their promotion. They were trying to show that you can make beautiful things out of reinforced concrete. And as I recall, they were pretty strong in terms of not letting anybody get in our way too long.
You said it was precast. What's the shape of the precast items that they brought in?
Okay, they're wedge shaped,
Uh-huh.
and they are the shape that you see here. And they're 20 degrees, so you look down on it.
So just a pipe piece. It's not curved. It's just.
Well, these are the precast elements you see here. You just don't see the joints.
Yes.
We were able to hide the joints, and I think that's basically because of the pre-stress that goes to the center is pulling them very tightly together, the joints together.
Would you run into the same permit problems nowadays trying to build a house like this?
I don't think so. I think that, and maybe I'm being optimistic overly, but I do a lot of crazy things. I'm an inventor, and there are people that you can talk to that will understand what you're trying to do.
You have a question
Yeah, so the windows around the perimeter, they don't have any load-bearing properties.
Correct.
Hans, who was the developer, do you remember?
I
Of
do
the
not.
Horizon
I
Homes?
do not. I'm sorry, that's, if I had the file, I could tell you who it is.
Well, it wasn't a developer so much. The Laguna Niguel Corporation was the one who brought it in, and so that was an investment group that included Cabot, and Forbes out of Boston, and Payne Weber. And so they were running Laguna Niguel Corporation, and they brought this in as a model for the idea that they could reproduce this around the world.
And I want to finish out by saying, I am absolutely joyed by seeing so many people who have the same love of architecture that I have. This is absolutely fabulous.